Marlies Kubiak was 61 when she buried her husband, and 11 days later she spent $25 at a county tax sale to buy back the old ice house he had sold off, and never explained. Nobody bid against her. The compressor was dead, the roof was packed with sawdust, and the wrecking crew was already scheduled. But the morning she unlocked the door, the building was humming. One room was still cold, and in the tenant ledger every locker was closed out in her husband's handwriting except one. Locker 8, marked paid, every quarter, for 40 years, in ink that was not his. She had never once seen the key. To understand how she ended up standing in a cold room at 61 with a pair of bolt cutters, you have to go back to the funeral lunch. It was held in the Legion Hall because the church basement had a leak, and the ladies had set out ham buns and 3 kinds of bars and a coffee urn that ran the whole time and never once got emptied. Marla stood by that urn for 2 hours. People kept coming up to her and saying the same 6 sentences in a slightly different order, and she kept saying thank you, and after a while her face hurt. Cass had been 64. His heart had been bad since 2015, and he had spent the whole decade after being careful about it, and then one Tuesday in March he had gone out to start the truck and had not come back in. She found him sitting behind the wheel with the door open and one boot on the gravel. Their daughter Renata had flown in from Milwaukee the next morning and had immediately started being useful, which was how she handled things. "I called a realtor," Renata said at the lunch, standing close so nobody else would hear. "Not to list it, just to talk. Mom, the house is too much for one person. I've been in that house since before you could walk. That's what I'm saying." Marlis looked at her daughter, 34 herself, a pharmacist wearing a black dress she had bought at the airport. "Get some coffee, honey. You've been on your feet," Renata went, because she knew that voice. It was Junie Marek who told her about the building. Junie was 74 and ran the lunch counter in the back of the hardware store and kept the post office substation in a caged corner by the paint mixer. And she had known Cass since he was a boy sweeping sawdust for his father. She came up to the urn with 2 cups and handed one over without asking. "You eat anything?" "No, didn't think so." Junie stood next to her and looked out at the room. "They're taking the ice house down in June. County let the contract." Marlis did not say anything. "I figured you knew." "I didn't know." "Well," Junie blew across her coffee, "it's been sitting empty since '94. Roof's going. Dietz quit paying the taxes on it a few years back and the county took it. And now they've got to do something with it or somebody's kid gets in there and gets hurt." She said it kindly, the way you deliver a fact that cannot be argued with. "There's a sale first. Has to be, by law. But nobody's going to bid on it. Why not? Ammonia system. Sawdust in the walls. There's no money in it, only bills." Junie turned her cup around in her hands. "Some things around here don't get sold, Marlis. They get outlived." Marlis drove home alone that night with the heater on too high. The ice house stood at the end of the street where the pavement quit, a long, low building of dark brick with a stepped parapet, and the words Black Hoof, Ice and Cold Storage painted on the north wall in letters that had gone the color of weak tea. Cass's grandfather had put it up in 1911 and had cut ice off the lake with a horse-drawn saw until the war. His father had converted it in '49 into a locker plant, 96 numbered lockers where farm families rented cold space by the quarter to keep a butchered hog or a summer's worth of sweet corn. Cass had taken it over in 1981 when he was 20. He ran it for 13 years, then he sold it in 1994 and never told her why. And she never asked him straight out, and that was the shape of it for the next 3 decades. There had been a front office in that building with a north window and a good concrete floor. She had walked it with a tape measure in 1992 and figured out where a 2-deck oven would go, where the proof box would sit, and how many cafe tables would fit along the wall. That folder was still somewhere in the house. At 38, she had believed absolutely that it was going to happen. In 2003, she bought a used 2-deck bakery oven at an equipment auction in Rochester for $1,100 and hauled it home on a borrowed trailer. It was still in the barn under a blue tarp. She had not baked for anybody but herself in a long time. The sale was on a Thursday morning in the county boardroom, which had folding chairs and a drop ceiling and smelled like carpet shampoo. 12 people came. 9 of them were there for a repossessed skid loader. Marla sat in the second row from the back with her purse on her knees and $25 in an envelope, because Junie had called the clerk and found out the opening bid and had called Marlis back the same afternoon and had said in a tone that was not asking, that a person ought to at least go and see. Roman Dietz came in at 5 after 9 and sat across the aisle. He was 58 and owned the grain elevator in the ag supply out on the highway, and he had on a pressed shirt and no jacket and reading glasses pushed up on his head. He nodded at her. She nodded back. The auctioneer worked through the skid loader and a pickup, and a lot of scrap pipe, and then he put on his glasses and read from a sheet. Parcel 11. Former commercial cold storage, 1.2 acres, structure of 1911. Buyer takes as is. Where is? Be advised the county's inspection notes an ammonia refrigeration system of unknown charge, sawdust and cork wall insulation, and possible asbestos in the pipe lagging. No warranty on the title to any equipment inside the structure. He looked up. Anybody who buys this is going to get a correction notice from the building official inside of 30 days. I'm required to say that out loud. Nobody moved. Marlis could hear the clock on the wall. Opening bid is $25. She had thought she would have to work up to it. She had thought there would be a moment where she decided. Instead, her hand went up like it belonged to somebody with a plan, and she heard her own voice say, 25. The auctioneer looked at her over his glasses. $25 from the lady in the blue coat. Do I hear 30? The room stayed quiet. Roman Dietz was looking at the floor between his shoes. Do I hear 30? 25 once? 25 twice. The gavel came down flat and soft, like a stapler. Sold. There was no reaction at all. Two men in the front row went back to their phones. The auctioneer moved on to a lot of chain-link fencing. At the clerk's window, she signed 4 places and printed her name twice and slid the envelope across. The clerk was maybe 30 and had a stud in her nose and was very careful with her. Ma'am, I have to tell you again that the county isn't warranting anything about the condition. I heard him. There's no value here. That's why the price is what it is. It's not worth anything, Marley said. That's fine. I've got $25. The clerk stamped the receipt and handed it over and, after a second, said, I'm sorry about your husband. Roman was waiting outside by the handicapped spots with his glasses down on his nose and his keys already out. Marley's. Roman. You know I tried to get that building condemned. Junie told me. I wasn't hiding it. He squinted off toward the water tower. I've been asking the county to take it down since before the pandemic. It's a hazard and it's sitting on a lot I'd use. He looked back at her. I'm telling you that to your face because I'd rather you hear it from me at a funeral lunch than from a lawyer's letter. I appreciate that. You're going to get a notice. The man said so. Roman opened his truck door and stood behind it. Cass and I did business one time in our lives and neither one of us enjoyed it. I don't have anything against you. I'd buy that lot off you today for a fair number and you could walk away clean. It's been mine for about 4 minutes. I know it. He got in. I'll call you in a couple weeks when you've had a chance to look at it. She drove out there with the windows down. The keys were in a coffee can on the shelf in the garage where Cass had kept keys since before they were married, a heavy ring of them, most of them for nothing anymore. She had brought the whole can. The third key she tried turned the padlock on the freight door, and that surprised her enough that she stood there a second with her hand on the hasp. The door rolled up on a chain and the smell came out at her all at once. Cork and salt and cold concrete, and underneath it, very faint, the iron smell of a room where meat used to be cut. She had not smelled it since before her daughter was born, and her whole body knew it before her mind did. Then she noticed the sound. It was low and steady and it came up through the soles of her shoes. She thought highway, but the highway was 2 miles off and running the wrong direction, and the sound had a rhythm to it, a slow shudder every 8 or 9 seconds, the way a machine breathes when it is loaded. She walked in. The main floor was 90 feet long, poured concrete, with a rail overhead where the carcasses used to run. Along the whole east side stood the lockers, 2 rows stacked, 96 of them, wooden doors with wire mesh panels and a brass number tag on every one. Half of them hung open. Somebody had gone through years ago and taken anything worth taking, and what was left was a broken hand truck, a stack of waxed cartons gone soft, and a coffee cup on the sill with a spoon still in it. The sound was coming from the far end, behind a steel door marked machinery. The compressor room had a floor drain and a workbench and a wall of pipe, and in the middle of it sat the ammonia compressor, a green cast iron thing the size of a chest freezer with a nameplate that said 1971. It was running. There was a film of dust over every surface in that room except the top of that machine, which was clean and warm. Marley stood in the doorway with her purse still on her shoulder. The main service panel by the door was dead. Somebody had pulled the meter off the outside wall years ago. But there was a second smaller panel bolted up next to it that she did not remember. Newer, with its own conduit running out through the block wall, and it had a padlock through the cover hasp, and wired to the padlock was a brass locker tag. The number stamped in it was 8. She went and found the office. It was at the front, on the north side with the window she had measured in 1992. And the glass was filthy, but the light still came in the way she remembered. There was a steel desk and a swivel chair and a calendar from 1994 still on the wall, turned to July. In the bottom drawer of the desk, under a phone book, was the ledger. It was a green cloth-bound book, wide, the kind with columns already ruled in, and it was heavier than it looked. She set it on the desk and opened it, and had to sit down. Every page was a locker. Locker number, tenant name, quarter, amount, paid. Page after page of the county's names and her husband's small square pencil printing, going back before he was born in his father's hand and then forward in his. She turned pages for a while without reading them, just watching the handwriting change hands in 1981. Then she got to the end, and the last entries were all dated the same week in June of 1994, and they all said the same thing: closed out, closed out, closed out. 95 of them, one after another, in Cass's printing, and beside a few he had written down where the tenant's things had gone. Except one. Locker 8 had its own page, and the page kept going. Paid, paid, paid quarter after quarter, 4 times a year, straight through 1994 and out the other side into 1995 and 98, and 2002 and 2010. The amounts were small and they changed over time. $9, then 10, then 12. And the handwriting changed too. Cass's printing for a long stretch, and then a rounder, looser hand, and then a third that pressed hard enough to emboss the page, and then back again. The last line was written in April, 6 weeks ago. Cass had been dead 3 of those weeks. Marlies closed the book and sat with her hand flat on the cover. Then she went and walked the row. Lockers 1 through 7 were the same as all the others: wooden doors, wire mesh, brass tags, most of them standing open on empty shelves. Locker 8 was not. Where 4 lockers should have been, there was a single opening framed out with steel angle, and hung in it was a cooler door, gasketed, insulated, with a heavy lever handle and a safety release on the inside, and it was newer than anything else in the building by half a century. Somebody had cut 4 lockers out of that wall and built something behind them. There was a hasp welded onto the frame and a padlock through it. Not an old padlock, a good one, brass, oiled. She put her palm flat on the steel. It was cold. She stood there with her hand on that door for a long time, and the compressor shuddered and caught somewhere behind the wall, and she felt it come up through the floor and into her knees. That night she went home and tore the garage apart. She went through the coffee can and the toolbox and the drawer in the workbench where he kept fuses and fishing line and the small brown envelopes from the hardware store. His coat pockets in the closet came up empty. The truck gave her 41 cents, a church bulletin and a pair of reading glasses she had bought him at the drugstore. There was no key. It was after dark when she got to the tackle box, and she only opened it because she had run out of things to open. It was a green metal tackle box with a tray that lifted out, and the tray was full of the same 7 lures he had used since the 70s. Taped inside the lid was an envelope. It was a plain white envelope, unopened, postmarked Tucson, Arizona, the 9th of March. It had come 6 days before he died. There was no letter inside. There were 4 $10 bills, folded once, and that was all. On the front, in a stranger's handwriting in blue ballpoint, somebody had written 2 lines. For 8. Tell him thank you. Marla sat down on the concrete floor of the garage with her back against the workbench and the money in one hand and the envelope in the other, and she read those 5 words maybe 40 times. Somewhere in Arizona, there was a person who did not know that Cass Kubiak was dead, who had put 2 stamps on an envelope in March and had gone on with their life believing that the thing they were paying for was still being taken care of. And it was. That was the part she did not get around. Out at the end of the street where the pavement quit, in a building she had owned for 11 hours, a machine older than her marriage was still running in the dark, and behind a locked steel door something was still cold. She did not sleep. At 4:30 she gave up on it, got dressed, and sat at the kitchen table with the envelope propped against the sugar bowl until the sky went gray. The hardware store opened at 6 for the farmers. Junie Marek had the coffee going and 4 men at the counter eating eggs off paper plates. And when Marlis came in with the envelope in her hand, Junie looked at it and then looked at Marlis and put down the pot. "Boys, take your plates to the front table." They took their plates to the front table. Marlis sat down on a stool. Junie poured her a cup she did not ask for and stood on the other side of the counter with her arms folded. "Where'd you find that?" "Taped in his tackle box." Junie nodded slowly. "Tucson. You know who it is. I know the postmark." Junie reached under the counter and came up with a shoebox, an old one with a rubber band around it, and set it between them like she was glad to be rid of it. "I don't know his name. He never signs it. He's been sending $40 every quarter since 2009, and one time he called the payphone here at Christmas and asked me if Cass was still alive, and I said yes, and he said good, and he hung up." Marlis took the rubber band off. The box was full of envelopes. Some had been opened and flattened out. Some were still sealed. Cleveland. Bismarck. 2 from Tucson, Fargo, a little town in Texas she had never heard of. Sioux Falls, 4 or 5 of those. Yuma. Green Bay. A post office box in Colorado, she counted 43 different return addresses in 9 states, and about half of them had no return address at all. Junie. I know. What is this? Junie unfolded her arms and put both hands flat on the counter and looked at them. She was 74 and had a bad shoulder and had run that lunch counter since her husband died in '99. In 2015, Cass had his first surgery, she said. The one where they cracked him. He was in Rochester 11 days, and the night before he went, he came in here at closing, and he sat right where you're sitting, and he said, Junie, I need you to do something, and I need you not to ask me about it. And you didn't ask him. I did ask him. Junie's mouth went tight. I asked him twice. He said the less I knew, the less I'd have to lie about. And then he said, please. And Cass Kubiak never said please to me in his life about anything. She turned her cup around. So I said, all right. What did he want you to do? He said envelopes were going to come to the substation with no name on them or addressed to the ice house, and the ice house doesn't get mail anymore. He said when they come, put them in a box. And on the first Saturday of April, July, October, and January, take whatever's in the box and slide it under the freight door out there. Not the front, the freight door. He said there's a gap under it. That's all? That's all. He said if I ever couldn't do it, to find somebody who would and not to tell them any more than I knew. Junie finally looked up. So for a decade I have walked down there 4 times a year with an envelope of other people's money and pushed it under a door of a building I don't own, and I have never once known what for. Marlis sat with that. Everybody in this town thinks I know everything that goes on, Junie said. I want you to understand that I did not know. Nobody was keeping it from you. We were all just holding one corner of it. Cass is the only one who ever saw the whole sheet. Did the money go anywhere? Did he take it? Never saw a nickel of it after it went under that door. Junie shook her head. I asked him one time, the year he got sick again, I said, Cass, is somebody living in there? And he laughed at me. He said, no, Junie, nobody's living in there. What else did he say? Junie thought about it a while. He said it's cheaper than you'd think, and it's more than I can afford. Marlis turned an envelope over in her fingers. Green Bay. No name. You never looked. I looked plenty. Junie almost smiled. There's a gap under that freight door about 1.5 inches. I have laid down on that gravel on my bad shoulder more than once and put my cheek in the dirt and looked under it. You know what you can see from down there? Concrete. 40 feet of concrete and a light somebody left on. There's no light on in there. Well, Junie took the empty cup away. There's something on. I could see it on the floor. Marlies drove back out with the shoebox on the seat beside her. She tried to do it right. She called a locksmith in the county seat and he came out at 11 and looked at the padlock and said it would take him 90 seconds. Then he walked down the row and looked at the door itself and put his hand on it and stepped back. That's a cooler door. I know it. Ma'am, is that room charged? There's an ammonia machine running in the back. He was already walking toward the freight door. Then I'm not touching it. If that room's leaking and I pop that gasket, whatever's in there comes out at me and I'm on the floor before I get to the truck. You need a refrigeration outfit with a meter, not a guy with a drill. How much is a refrigeration outfit? More than you want. He got into his van. And they won't come out on a building with no certificate. I'm sorry. You're not the first person I've said no to this week. She stood in the empty lot and watched him go. They came at 2 in the afternoon, Roman Dietz and the county building official, in 2 separate trucks which she understood was on purpose. The inspector was a heavy young man with a clipboard and a folding ladder, and he was polite to her the whole time and did not enjoy any of it. He walked the building for 50 minutes. He wrote for another 20. Then he handed her 3 carbon copies and stood there while she read them. Ammonia refrigeration system of unknown charge with no operating permit and no certified operator on file, he said. That's the big one. Either you decommission it and have the charge pulled and documented by a licensed contractor, and I'll be honest with you, ma'am. Nobody in this state is going to certify a 1971 system in a wooden cork building. What's the second one? Sawdust. He tipped his head at the walls. That's a fire load I can't calculate. You'd have to open the walls to prove what's in there. And if it's what I think it is, it's got to come out or you've got to sprinkler the building. And the roof. And the roof. He clicked his pen. You've got 90 days from today. If it's not corrected, the county abates it, which means they take the building down and they bill you for it. How much is that bill? For a masonry structure that size with an ammonia charge in it, I've seen it come in over 90,000. She read the notice twice more. The paper was pink. Roman waited until the inspector had loaded his ladder and gone. I didn't call him, he said. That's automatic. It goes with the deed transfer. I believe you. I want to say something to you and then I'll leave you alone. He put his glasses up on his head. $18,000. Today. For the lot, you keep whatever's inside it that you can carry out, and the county's problem becomes my problem, and my company can eat an abatement bill and you cannot. Roman. Marlis, that building took my father's money and it took your husband's whole life. He said it without any heat at all, which was worse. I watched Cass sweep floors at that school for 22 winters with a bad back. I'd see his truck in the lot at 10 o'clock at night. I'm not going to pretend I know what that was about, but I know what it cost him. And I'm telling you as somebody who has watched this whole thing from the outside for a long time, do not let it start costing you too. He got in his truck. Think about it for a week. The offer doesn't get worse. Renata called at 6 that evening. How are you doing? Really? I'm all right. Did you go to the sale? Marley's had the pink notice on the table in front of her with her reading glasses on top of it. There was a long pause where she could have said all of it. The compressor, the ledger, the shoebox, the envelope from Tucson, and she stood in her own kitchen and made a choice she was not proud of. There wasn't anything there, she said. Okay, good. Mom, I'm going to send you some listings. You don't have to look at them. Just don't delete them. All right, honey. I love you. I love you too. She hung up and sat there and thought, that is the first thing I have lied to my daughter about since she was in high school, and I did it in 4 seconds and it did not even feel hard. She got the bolt cutters out of the barn at 10:30 at night. Later she would say that she had reasons. She would say she had been told no by a locksmith and handed a pink piece of paper and offered $18,000 all in one day, and that a person can only be reasonable for so many hours in a row. That is all true, and it is also true that she was not being brave. She was being impatient, and she went alone at night without telling anybody into a building with an ammonia charge in it, and that is exactly as stupid as it sounds. She propped the freight door open with a cinder block for the air and set up the work light on an extension cord run off her truck through the inverter Cass used for ice fishing. Over her sweatshirt, she pulled on a winter coat in the middle of May. Then she stood in front of locker 8 for 11 minutes doing nothing at all. I'm not asking your permission, she said out loud finally. You had 3 decades to tell me. The bolt cutters took 2 tries. The shackle went with a crack that came back off the far wall, and the padlock hit the concrete and rolled, and she picked it up and put it in her coat pocket and did not know why. The lever handle had frost welded at the hinge. She hung her whole weight on it and it gave in stages. 3 loud clicks, and then the gasket let go with a soft tearing sound, and the cold came out over her shoes. It came out at her ankles first, and then it came up. Real cold, dry with a smell in it she could not place at all. Not meat. Not freezer burn. Something dusty and green and faintly sweet, like the inside of a paper feed sack. She swung the light around. It was not a locker. 4 lockers had been cut out of that wall, and behind them somebody had framed and insulated and paneled a room about 10 feet by 12, floor to ceiling, and every wall of it was shelving. The shelves were full. Not with meat. Not with anything she had a word for at first. Small paper envelopes, thousands of them, standing on edge in wooden trays like library cards. Quart jars with rubber gaskets and steel bales. Coffee cans with masking tape lids. Baby food jars in rows. A whole shelf of manila coin envelopes bundled with rubber bands that had gone hard and split, and every single one of them had writing on it. She took a step in. Her breath came out white and hung there. She picked up the jar closest to her hand. It was heavy and cold enough to hurt. Inside were seeds, flat and pale yellow, maybe 2 cups of them. Taped to the side was a strip of masking tape, and on it, in her husband's small square pencil printing, Bow UARE. September 88. Sweet corn. Golden bantam. True since 1919. She put it back. She picked up the next one. Voss. August 87. Home squash, no name for it. Her mother brought it. The next was a coin envelope. Light as nothing. Lindquist. July 91. Tomato, the pink one off the south fence. She went along the shelf reading them out loud without meaning to, and her voice sounded strange in that room, flat and close. And she got to the end of the shelf and turned around and there were 7 more shelves like it. Hogan. October 86. Dry bean. The brown speckle. 41 ounces. Pietsch. June 90. Muskmelon. He says it won't keep. It kept. Sandel. March 93. Pole bean. Her mother's came from Norway in a coat. Some of the writing was old and had gone silver on the tape. Some of it was fresh. She found a coffee can on the bottom shelf near the door with tape so new it was still white, and the printing on it was shaky in a way the rest was not. The letters leaning, the pencil pressed too hard. Break. Feb. Oats. He brought them in himself. Good man. February. Cass had died the 17th of March. Somebody had walked in here with a coffee can of oats, 5 or 6 weeks before her husband died, and he had labeled it and set it on the shelf and driven home and eaten supper across from her and said nothing. On the back of the door at eye level, there was an index card taped up with the tape gone brittle in yellow. It was the only card in that room not filed in a box. She had to hold the light right up on it to read it, and it was one line, and it was written the way he wrote a thing he had said out loud 1,000 times before he ever wrote it down. "It'll be here when you come back for it." She stood there with the light on that card until her hands started shaking from the cold, and she had to put the work light down on a shelf. On the wall at eye height, on a bracket, sat a wooden index card box with a hinged lid. It was oak, and it had been made by hand, and the corners were finger-jointed, and she knew the joints. He had made her a recipe box out of the same scrap in 1989. She opened it. The cards were standing up and it packed tight, hundreds of them, maybe more, with tabbed dividers by year going back to 1986. Every card was ruled and filled out the same way. A name, a date, what it was, how much, and a line at the bottom for what he called disposition, where he had written things like returned to Sun 2004, or split with Bauer, 2011, or over and over in the same 3 letters, hold. Marla stood in a walk-in cooler in her dead husband's building, with her breath hanging in front of her face, and pulled a card at random out of the 87 divider, the way you would pull a book off a shelf in a strange house. She read the name on it, and her hand went numb. And it was not the cold. Odom, T. January 87. Sweet corn, country gentleman. 11 ounces. From his father planted every spring since 1931. And on the disposition line in pencil, dated the same month. Hold. Theo Odom had lost the home place in the spring of 1987, 420 acres and a barn his grandfather built, and he had gone to work at the elevator scale house and he had died in 1991, without ever saying one word about any of it to anybody, including his daughter. Marlies was 22 that January. She had known Cass Kubiak for about 5 months. She stayed in that room until almost 2 in the morning. She went through the box divider by divider. The 86s were thin, 11 cards, all of them from that October and November. 87 was thicker. 88 was the fattest divider in the box by a wide margin. So fat the cards had gone convex from the pressure. And she remembered that summer, the corn burning up standing in the field, the dust coming off the section roads in a wall you could see from town. The 90s thinned out. The 2000s were thin. Then around 2011, they started getting thicker again. And she did not understand why until she read a few and saw that these were not farms going under anymore. These were people bringing things in. Grandchildren. A woman in Rochester who had found jars in her father's basement after he died and had driven them out. A man who mailed a padded envelope from Oregon with a note. She counted the cards at the end because she could not stand not knowing. 1,040. She sat down on the cold floor with her back against the shelving and put the box on her knees, and she was not moved, which surprised her. She was angry enough that her jaw hurt. "You should have asked me," she said. The compressor knocked and picked up somewhere behind the wall. "You should have asked me and let me be the one who said no." She heard it come out of her mouth, and she knew instantly that it was true. All of it. Both halves of it. And that was the thing she could not carry. She would have said no. In 1994, she had a folder with a floor plan in it, and a north window picked out, and she had just turned 30, and she had waited long enough. And if Cass Kubiak had come home and sat down at that table and said, "I have to sell the whole plant and take a janitor's job to keep one room cold for a bunch of people who moved to Arizona," she would have said no. She would have said, "Absolutely not." She would have been right to say it, and he would have listened to her, and every jar on those shelves would have gone in a dumpster in the summer of '94. He knew that. He had known it about her since before they were married. And instead of respecting it, he had gone around it, and he had let her think he was a man who lost his father's business because he was not sharp enough to keep it. "You let me think you failed," she said. "You let me be embarrassed for you." Then she took it back out loud, to nobody. Then she said it again. At some point, she realized she had not eaten since noon, and she found a granola bar in her coat pocket from the funeral, one of the ones the ladies had put out in a basket, and she ate it sitting on the floor of a walk-in cooler at 2 in the morning in her dead husband's building. It was stale. That was the thing that finally broke her. The stale granola bar. And she cried in a way she had not managed to do at the funeral or at the burial or once in the 11 days since. Then she got up, closed the door, went out and moved the cinder block, pulled the freight door down, and drove home. The filing cabinet was in the basement, 2 drawers, and Cass had kept it the way he kept everything, which was badly and completely. Nothing was thrown out, and nothing was in order. It took her until noon the next day. She found the state inspection report first, dated the 11th of April, 1994. 4 pages. The ammonia system was condemned. There was a contractor's bid stapled to the back for replacing the receiver, the condenser, and about 200 feet of pipe, and the number at the bottom was $41,200. She found the purchase agreement under it. The 21st of June, 1994. Dietz Land and Holding Company. $32,000 for the building, the lot, and all fixtures. 32. He had sold it for less than the repair cost because that was what it was worth to somebody who was going to shut it down. She almost missed the clause. It was on the 4th page, paragraph 9, in the middle of a run of language about easements, typed by a lawyer in the county seat who had probably charged him $90 for it. Seller reserves in perpetuity, for himself and his assigns, sole access to and use of locker number 8 and the mechanical space serving same, together with continued electrical service thereto. Said service to be separately metered and billed to seller. Billed to seller. She sat on the basement steps and read that sentence 11 or 12 times. The bills were in a shoebox on the shelf above the water softener, and they were not sorted, and there were a great many of them. A second meter, a small account, in his name only, at an address that was not their house. She carried the box up to the kitchen table and got a legal pad and the calculator out of the junk drawer and started at 1994. It took her 4 hours. She had to stop twice. The bills ran between about $90 a month in the winter and $400 and some in July and August, and the early ones were on that thin blue paper, and the later ones were printouts. And in 2009, the account went to autopay off a checking account she had never seen a statement for. At about 4:30 in the afternoon, she drew a line under the last column and added it up. $81,400, give or take, over 3 decades to keep one room in a condemned building at 0 degrees. Then she opened the green ledger and added up the other column, the paid column. Every envelope, every quarter from 9 states. $19,800. She sat there with the 2 numbers in front of her. $61,600. That was the difference. That was what he had covered himself, $130 at a time, out of a night custodian's paycheck, for the entire back half of his life, while she was working the steam press and then the kitchen at the care home and going without a great many things and telling herself a story about a man who could not manage money. If you have made it this far into Marlis Kubiak's story, take a second and hit subscribe, because what she did with those 2 numbers is the part I have been waiting to tell you. Renata drove up from Milwaukee on Friday. Marlis had called her Wednesday night and had said, without any preamble at all, I lied to you about the sale, come home. They went out there Saturday morning. Marlis let her daughter open the door herself. Renata stood in that cold room for a long time without saying anything. She read labels. She picked up the jar of golden bantam and turned it in the light. Then she read the card taped to the back of the door twice. Then she walked out into the main floor and stood by the empty lockers with her arms crossed. And when Marlies came out after her, Renata was crying and furious at the same time. He told me we couldn't afford a water heater, she said. Mom, we washed in the sink for a month. I was in 5th grade. I remember carrying a pan of water up the stairs. I remember. Band camp was $400. I know what it was. He had the same coat my whole life. Every single time I asked for anything, he made that face. That sorry face. And I stopped asking. I actually stopped asking, and the whole time he was paying somebody's electric bill in there. It's not somebody's. Whose is it then? It's your Grandpa Theo's, for one, Marlis said. It's your Grandpa Theo's sweet corn on the 2nd shelf. His father planted it every spring since 1931, and it's sitting in there in a coin envelope with 11 ounces in it. Renata stopped. So don't tell me it's somebody's, Marlis said. Don't you dare defend him. I'm not defending him. He was a coward about it, and I'll say that to anybody who asks me. Marlis heard her own voice go up and did not stop it. He went behind my back for 3 decades because he did not have the guts to hear me say no, and I'll never get to have that fight with him now, and that is what I have got instead of a husband. So no, I am not defending him. She put her hand flat on the wall. I'm telling you what he did. They sat in the truck afterward for 20 minutes not talking. Then Renata said, how many are in there? And Marlis said, 1,940. And Renata said, okay, and that was the first crack in it. Tova Sandell showed up on Monday because Junie Marek told her to. She was 26, and she came in a 1998 pickup with a clutch that screamed the last 30 feet into the lot, and she had a hooded sweatshirt and a sunburn and dirt worked into her hands past washing. She had come back the previous fall to farm her grandmother's 40 acres and had put in soybeans on rented seed and had made about $1,100 on the year. Junie said there might be something out here of my grandma's. Marlis took her in and opened the box to the 90s. The card was there. Sandell, March 93. Pole Bean, her mother's. Came from Norway in a coat. 9 inches, hold. Tova read it standing up, holding it in both hands, and did not say anything for a while. She died when I was 4, she said finally. I've got 2 pictures of her. Everything I know about my grandmother, I just learned off an index card. Marlis found the envelope on the 3rd shelf. It was manila, soft with age, and it weighed almost nothing. She poured some out into a paper sack from the office and weighed it on a postal scale Junie had loaned her because the one in the building had rusted shut. 4 ounces. Enough for a long row. She left the rest on the shelf. You bring some back, Marlis said. That's how it works. You grow it out and you bring back more than you took. How much do I owe you? $12 a quarter, same as everybody. Tova got out a fold of bills from her jeans and counted $12 onto the desk in the front office. 1s and a 5, and Marlies opened the green ledger to the page for locker 8 and picked up the pencil out of the spine. It was a flat carpenter's pencil, worn down to about 2 inches, sharpened with a knife. She wrote the date and the name and 4 ounces, and then she made herself write paid in the column, in her own handwriting, underneath 160 quarters of somebody else's. Her hand was not steady and the letters came out wrong. She left them. That night she wrote to Tucson. One of the opened envelopes in Junie's shoebox had a return address on it, an apartment number on a street she could not pronounce, and Marley sat down with a card and did not know what to put on it. She started 4 times. In the end she wrote that Cass Kubiak had died on the 17th of March, that she was his wife, that she had found the room, and that everything in it was all right. She put her phone number at the bottom and mailed it in the morning. He called her the following Wednesday at 7 in the evening. His voice was old and careful, and he did not introduce himself for almost a full minute. He said he had been sitting with her card since Monday. My dad had 160 acres on the north side of the lake, he said. We went under in '89. I was 19. I hauled the last of the machinery out on a Saturday, and my dad went and sat in the truck and would not come in the house. I'm sorry. He took a Folgers can down to your husband on the Monday. Popcorn. That's all it was. Just popcorn my grandmother started saving in the 50s. Little yellow ears about so long. He stopped. I thought it was pathetic. I want you to know I told him that. I was 19 and I said, Dad, we lost everything and you're worried about popcorn. Marlis did not say anything. Cass mailed me some in 1996, 2 ounces, in Arizona, in a padded envelope with a note that said his address hadn't changed. The man cleared his throat. I've grown it out in a garden in the desert every year since. My son grows it. My granddaughter grew it in a pot at her school last spring and got a ribbon for it. I didn't know he mailed things. Ma'am, he mailed things all over this country. He laughed a little, and it came apart in the middle. I called that hardware store one Christmas just to make sure he wasn't dead, and I never once called him. $40 4 times a year for 16 years, and I never picked up the phone and called that man because I did not know what I would say to him, and now I know exactly what I would have said. And it is much too late. She sat down on the arm of the couch. You could tell me, she said. I'll write it down. The county board met on the 2nd Tuesday, and the inspector had amended his report. He had gotten a licensed contractor out to meter the ammonia charge, which was the one thing everybody had been guessing at, and it came back at a little over 400 pounds, which put the building into a higher hazard class than the notice had assumed. The board chairman read it out loud and then said that under the ordinance, the correction period on a Class 2 hazard was 45 days, not 90, and that the clock had started the day the amended report was filed, which was 8 days ago. Marlis had signed up to speak. She got 3 minutes. She stood up at the little podium with the pink notice folded in her hand, and she said that the building had one room in it that was not a hazard to anybody, that it had been running on its own separate meter since 1994, and that what was in it belonged to about 40 families in this county and their children who had moved away. Somebody in the back said, belonged to them how? And Marley said, seed. There was a pause and a couple of people laughed. Not meanly. They laughed the way you laugh when somebody says a word you were not expecting in a room with a drop ceiling and a state flag in the corner. She tried to explain it, and it came out wrong. She said it was corn and beans and squash, and that some of it was the only seed of its kind left anywhere. Then she heard how that sounded, standing there in a cardigan, saying that 90-year-old bean seed in a cooler was worth a building the county had already condemned, and she lost her place and looked at her notes and could not read her own writing. Her 3 minutes ran out. The chairman thanked her. The board voted 5-0 to affirm the amended notice. Roman Dietz caught up with her in the parking lot by the propane tank. That was a bad room to try that in, he said. I'm not being smart with you. That's just a fact. You needed a lawyer and a photograph and about 400 pages of something official looking. And you had a cardigan and the truth. I know it. 37 days. He held his keys and did not go anywhere. Marlis, they will take that building down and they will put a lien on your house for it. Your house. I have watched the county do it twice. $18,000. And you keep every jar in there, and I will personally carry them out to your truck." She looked at him a while. Behind him, the water tower stood up over the elevator and the sun was going down orange on the east side of it. And she had known this man since they were both in high school. And she thought about the 11 cards in the 86 divider and the one at the front of them, and the 6 ounces. "Roman," she said, "your mother's name is in the box." He did not move at all. "That's not true," Roman said. "Come out and read it. My mother has been dead since 2017. I know when she died, I brought a hot dish to the church." Marlis unlocked her truck. 10 o'clock, I'll leave the freight door up. He was there at 9:40. She heard his truck on the gravel and did not go out. She stood in the front office under the north window with the card box already down off its bracket and open on the desk, and she listened to him come the length of that concrete floor, and his boots were slow, and he stopped twice. "There's no light in here," he said from the doorway. "There's one line live in the whole building and it runs the machine. Bring the flashlight off your dash." He got the flashlight. She had the 86 divider pulled forward and her finger behind the first card, and she took it out and put it in his hand and stepped back so he could hold the light on it himself. DIE000086. Scarlet Runner beans. 6 unches. From her mother's garden, brought over in a trunk. Hold. Roman read it. Then he turned it over because there was writing on the back too, in 3 different pencils at 3 different times. The first line was from October of 86. She says the floor is red, she wants them where there's a fence. The second was from May of 2017, a month after Ilse Dietz's funeral. If she doesn't come back, her boy gets them. The third was from that August. Asked him at the elevator. He didn't know what I meant. Try again. There was no fourth line. Roman stood in the doorway of a dark building holding a flashlight on an index card and did not say anything for a long time. "He came into my office," he said. "I figured." It was August. It was harvest prep and I had a truck down and a guy quit, and he came in and stood by the counter and he said something about my mother. Roman's hand had gone slack and the beam was on the floor. He said, "Your ma left something with me." And I said, "Well, Cass, whatever it is, you can drop it by the house." And he stood there, and I said, "Was there something else?" And he said, "No." That's to try again. He never tried again. No. Roman put the card down on the desk very carefully, square to the edge, the way you set down something that is not yours. "You want to know about my dad," he said. "Only if you want to tell me." The auction was the 4th of April, 1986, in our yard. They set the wagons up by the corn crib. He was looking at the wall. 140 people came, and about 11 of them were buyers, and the rest came to watch. The 439 went for less than the tires on it were worth. A man from over by the river bought my dad's welder and paid him for it in cash out of his billfold standing in our driveway. And my dad said thank you. Marlis did not move. My mother stood on the porch the whole time with her hands like this. He put his hands together in front of him, low, one over the other. She didn't cry. Somebody brought her a chair and she wouldn't sit in it. "How old were you?" 18. He picked the flashlight back up and turned it off. He got hired on doing custom work for the outfit that bought the place. He was running a chisel plow on his own ground for wages, and he died in the machine shed on the 12th of November of that year. And it was not his shed. The compressor caught and shuddered somewhere behind them. So I went to school and I came back and I went to work at that elevator and I bought it in 2001, Roman said. And I have spent my whole life being the one who buys, and I have never once apologized for it. And I'm not going to start tonight. I'm not asking you to. I know what you're asking me and the answer has to be no. He said it evenly. You have 36 days. Nothing I feel about a card changes an ammonia charge. He walked out. At the freight door he stopped. Can I keep that? It's your mother's. He took it with him. She heard him sit in his truck in the lot for 8 or 9 minutes before the engine started. She spent the next week and a half trying to buy her way out of it. 2 mechanical outfits would not come look at the building at all once she said the word ammonia over the phone. The third came out of Rochester on a Thursday, a woman engineer and a man with a clipboard. And they were there 4 hours, and they were the first people who had walked into that place and not told her it was hopeless. What the inspector actually wanted, the engineer said, was for the ammonia to be gone. Nobody cared about the cold. So you pull the charge, you certify the disposal, you cut the old pipe out, and then you set a packaged glycol chiller on a pad outside the north wall and run insulated line to one small evaporator inside that one room. Modern, sealed, no permit operator, nothing in the walls. It's a beer cooler at that point, she said. The county won't even want to talk to you about it. What's it cost? The engineer wrote it on the back of her own business card. $61,900 for the chiller and the abatement together. plus about $4,000 to open up and clear the one wall the pipe ran through, plus whatever the roof came to. Marla stood in the office with the card in her hand and the north window filthy behind her. She had $9,200 in savings after the funeral, and $11,000 in change left on the house. She was 61. She had retired off the care home kitchen in February, and her income was one Social Security check and half of a small pension from a laundry that no longer existed. Junie put a coffee can with a slit in the lid on the counter at the hardware store the next morning, and by Saturday it had $431 in it, and Marlis had to go out to her truck and sit down when she saw it, and she was not able to explain to anybody why. The heat came the second week of June. It came the way it does out there, all at once and without any manners about it. 91 on Tuesday, and 94 on Wednesday, and 96 by Friday with the humidity so thick the section roads went soft. The building sat all day in full sun on a black lot with no shade on it anywhere, and the roof was tar paper overboard over a foot of packed sawdust, and inside the shell the air went to 110 by 4 in the afternoon. Marlis had bought a wireless thermometer at the hardware store for $39 and had stuck the sensor to a shelf inside the cold room and clipped the little screen to the visor in her truck. For 3 weeks it had said the same thing every time she looked at it. 0, 0, 0. Thursday it said 4. Friday afternoon it said 9, and she drove out there and stood in front of the machinery room door and listened to the compressor start, run for about 40 seconds and shut off. Then start again. Then shut off. She called a refrigeration outfit out of the county seat and got an answering service and left a message and did not hear back. At 4:10 on Saturday morning, her phone went off on the nightstand, the little chirping alarm she had set at 32 degrees, and she was in the truck in 4 minutes with her coat over her nightgown. The building was silent. She stood in the machinery room with a flashlight, and the green cast iron thing in the middle of the floor was cool to the touch for the first time since she had bought the place. There was oil under it. The motor had gone. The thermometer inside the room said 29. She called Junie Marek at 4:40 in the morning, and Junie picked up on the second ring like a woman who has been getting bad phone calls her whole life. It quit. How long have you got? I don't know. Find out and call me back. The refrigeration man called her at 6. He was in his truck and he had her on speaker and he asked her 3 questions and then told her the truth. That compressor's done, and I couldn't get a motor for it in a week anyway. It's older than I am. A turn signal ticked in the background. Here's your problem though. It's not the warm. Seat'll sit at 50 degrees a good while and be all right. Your problem is what happens on the way there. Meaning what? Meaning that room's going to sweat. Everything in there is at 0 and the air coming in at it is 90-some, with the dew point in the 70s. Every jar, every envelope, every shelf in that room is going to run water. Wet seed at 80 degrees molds in about 3 days and then it's compost. How long before it starts? You're insulated pretty good and you're out of the sun in there. I'd say you've got about 30 hours before it comes up past freezing and starts. Maybe a little more. I wouldn't plan on more. Marlis stood in the front office and looked at the shelves through the open door. How much is in there? He asked, roughly. She had never weighed it. She looked at 8 shelves 12 feet long and did the arithmetic in her head the way she used to do trays of dinner rolls. About 2,000 pounds. He was quiet a second. Ma'am, you need a lot of freezer fast. She called Junie back at 6:20. Junie did not ask her a single question. She said, give me 40 minutes and hung up. What happened next? Marley's never entirely got over. The first truck came in at 3 minutes after 7, and it was 2 brothers who ran a hog operation south of town with a chest freezer, standing up in the bed strapped to the headache rack with ratchet straps. They backed up to the freight door and got out and said, Junie called, where do you want it? By 8, there were 9 vehicles in that lot. By 9:30, there were 26. They came with chest freezers out of basements and garages and rented storage units, some of them still with frost in the bottom and a bag of somebody's venison that got carried into the house and left on the counter. A man brought a fish house on a trailer with a generator and 2 freezers already bolted to the floor of it. The school district sent a maintenance man with a key to the lunch program's walk-in and said, fill it. We don't start until September. Somebody's church brought a 15-passenger van with the middle seats out and 11 coolers in the back. The funeral home called and offered its cooler, and there was a short pause on the phone, and then Marlise said yes, thank you, and nobody made a joke about it, then or later. They ran a line of people from the cold room out to the dock. Tova Sandell put herself at the door and would not let anybody in the room but 2 at a time, because she had figured out within about 4 minutes that the worst thing that could happen was not the heat, it was 40 pairs of hands in a dark cooler mixing up 1,940 cards. Renata came out of Milwaukee at 90 on the interstate and got there at 11 and took over the labeling table, and she was very good at it because that is what a pharmacist does all day. She made everybody write down what tray went into what freezer and whose house it was going to, and a phone number in duplicate on a legal pad and a clipboard. Kids carried trays with both arms and their chins on top. Junie Marek stood in the middle of the lot in a folding chair with the shoebox on her knees and directed traffic and told people where the bathroom was, which was a 5-gallon bucket in the machinery room, and nobody complained about that either. Somebody's wife started running the church coffee urn off the fish house generator at about 10. At noon, a woman Marlis had gone to school with came up to her by the dock with a tray of coin envelopes in her hands and said, "Marlis, my mother's name is on one of these." And Marlis said, "I know. It's on 4 of them." And the woman had to go sit in her car. The maintenance man from the school came back for a second load around 1 and asked her, straight out, the question everybody in that lot had been too polite to ask. "Ma'am, I'll haul it wherever you want. I just like to know what I'm hauling it for." He had his hands on his hips and sweat through his shirt. "How long has this stuff got to stay froze?" 10 years. Forever? Marlis set her tray down on the tailgate. "It doesn't have to stay cold forever," she said. "It has to stay cold until somebody comes back and plants it." He thought about that. "Well," he said, "that's different than what I was picturing," and he picked up 2 more trays and carried them out. By 2 in the afternoon, they had moved maybe 600 pounds. That is when it got quiet, because everybody standing in that lot did the arithmetic at about the same time. They were putting a 2,000-pound cold room into 24 home chest freezers on residential service scattered across 9 miles of Township Road, half of them running off extension cords in unair-conditioned garages in 96-degree heat. 3 of them had already tripped a breaker. The school walk-in was full, so was the fish house, and its generator was running hot. The refrigeration man came out on his own time at 4 and walked the lot and told her plainly that a third of what she was putting into those freezers was going to sit at 25 degrees in a garage all summer, with the lid open twice a day, and that some of it would be all right and some of it would not, and there would be no way afterward to know which was which. "You need 1 box," he said. 1 box, 1 temperature, 1 door. Where do I get 1 box? You get a reefer trailer. Anybody who hauls product has got one. He wiped his face with his forearm. In this county, on a Saturday in June? Good luck. The sun went down at 9:11. There were still 19 people in the lot. They had strung 2 work lights off the fish house, and they were doing the bottom shelf, the old shelf, the 86s and 87s, the coin envelopes with the writing gone silver, and they were moving very slowly because everyone was tired and everyone understood which shelf it was. Marlis was standing on the dock with a tray in her hands when headlights swung in off the road. They came in high and wide and too slow, and then a second set behind them, and the first thing she heard was the engine brake, and everybody in that lot turned around at once. It was a semi. It was backing a 53-foot refrigerated trailer down the gravel toward the freight door, white, with the co-op's green lettering on the side of it, and the reefer unit running on the nose. The truck stopped. The air brakes let go. Roman Dietz stepped down out of the cab with a set of keys in his hand, and Marlis stood on that dock holding a tray of her father's sweet corn and did not know, from anything in his face, whether the man had come there to help her or to finish it. He looked at the lot. 20-some vehicles, 2 work lights, a coffee urn on a card table, 19 people standing in the gravel looking back at him. "Who's running this?" "She is," Junie Marek said from her chair. Roman turned to the dock. "Where do you want it?" That was the whole of it. He did not make a speech and nobody asked him for one, and later on, when people in town told this story, that was always the part they told, that Roman Dietz backed a reefer up to that door at 9 o'clock on a Saturday night, and said 4 words, and went to work. He had brought a driver and a pallet jack and 11 wire shelving units out of an empty room at the elevator office, and he set the shelves up inside that trailer in 20 minutes and lashed them to the E-track so nothing would walk. The reefer unit held at 0 without any trouble at all. It was built to run halfway across the country full of frozen product, and it did not care about 96 degrees. They pulled everything back out of the chest freezers. That was the hard part, and it took until almost 4 in the morning because every tray had to be found again off Renata's clipboard, and half of it was already in somebody's garage 9 miles out. Trucks came and went all night. Renata sat on an overturned bucket with a headlamp on and checked things off and made people spell names. Around 2, somebody's teenage kid fell asleep sitting up against the trailer tire and his mother left him there. At about 3:45, they got to the last of it. The bottom shelf, the 86s, the 11 cards. Marlis carried the tray out herself, and Roman was standing at the trailer door, and she stopped in front of him with it, and neither one of them said anything. The scarlet runners were in a pint jar with a rusted bale and a strip of masking tape gone the color of weak coffee. 6 ounces. Beans about the size of a thumbnail, purple and black, mottled. Roman took the jar out of the tray and stood there holding it in both hands. "She never said one word to me," he said. No. 40 seasons in the dark and it's my mother's beans. He turned the jar. She stood in that yard and watched them sell my father's tractor, and she never told me she saved anything. Maybe she couldn't. Maybe she thought I'd have laughed at her. He said it without any self-pity, which somehow made it worse. I would have. That's the thing. In '86, I'd have laughed. He carried the jar into the trailer himself, and then he came back out and took his mother's card out of his shirt pocket, where it had been for 11 days, and he asked Marlies for the pencil. She got it out of the ledger and gave it to him. Roman wrote one line on the back of that card under Cas Kubiak's 3 in block letters, pressing hard. He knows now. Then he filed it in the box himself, in front in the '86 divider, and closed the lid. The sun came up at 5:20, and there were still 30 people in that lot. Somebody's wife had made egg bake in 2 hotel pans on a camp stove, and it went in about 4 minutes. People sat on tailgates and drank church coffee out of styrofoam and looked at a white trailer running in a gravel lot. And nobody wanted to leave, and for about an hour nothing happened at all, which is the best part of any long night. Marlie sat on the edge of the dock with her feet hanging off and a paper plate on her knees, and did not talk to anybody. Roman came and sat down on the dock about 4 feet away from her with his own plate, and they watched the lot fill up with light. "Your husband was a difficult man to do business with," he said. "He was a difficult man to be married to. I bought that building off him for $32,000 and I thought I'd beat him." Roman scraped his plate. "I got the deed and a lawyer's letter about a locker, and I never read past the second page. $32,000, and he sold me a building and kept the only room in it that was worth anything. He didn't do it to beat you." "No, I know he didn't." He set the plate down. "That's what's been sitting on my chest since 10 o'clock last night. He didn't do it to beat me. It wasn't about me at all. I've spent my whole life keeping score with people who weren't playing." Marlies did not answer that. It did not seem like it needed one. After a while, he stood up and brushed off the back of his jeans and said he had to go home and take a shower and be at the elevator by 7, and he did. Roman left the trailer there. He left it 11 days on his own fuel, and then he moved it to a corner of the elevator lot where there was 3-phase power to plug it into, and he ran it there through the rest of June, July, August, and most of September, and he never once sent her a bill or brought it up. On the second Tuesday in July, he stood up at the county board with a folder. He did not talk about beans. He talked about a Class 2 hazard and a mitigation schedule, and a licensed abatement contractor, and he said his company would act as general on the job at cost. And he put the Rochester engineer's drawings on the table, and he asked for 120 days on the correction notice. The board gave him 185 to nothing in about 4 minutes. Afterward, in the same parking lot by the propane tank, Marlies said, "That's the same room you told me nothing would change about." "Nothing did change about it," Roman said. "You just quit going in there with a cardigan. The drive was Tova Sandel's idea, and Renata built the machine for it. There were 96 lockers in that building. Tova put a number on every one of them with a paint pen. And the deal was simple. $650 sponsored a locker for 10 years, and your name went on a brass tag on the door, or your mother's name, or whoever you wanted, and you got a key." Renata took Junie's shoebox back to Milwaukee and spent 3 weekends on it. She matched postmarks to names in the ledger, and names in the ledger to names on the cards, and she found addresses for 211 people, and she built a mailing list and then a website with photographs of the shelves on it. The first letter went out the 14th of July. It was 1 page, and Marlies wrote it herself and would not let anybody edit it. It said what the building was, and what was in it, and what her husband had done, and what it cost him, and at the bottom it said, "This is your seed. Come get it. And here is what it takes to keep the lights on." The mail started coming back the following Tuesday, and it did not stop for 6 weeks. Checks from Bismarck and Yuma and Sioux Falls and Cleveland. A money order from a woman in Green Bay for $65 with a note that said, "This is all of it. I'm sorry. My dad's name was Haugen." Somebody in Colorado sponsored 4 lockers and would not give a name for any of them. A retired agronomist at the university drove out on his own time, spent 2 days in the trailer with a moisture meter, and wrote a report that Renata put on the website. And after that, the checks started coming from people who had never heard of this county in their lives. The man from Tucson sent $900 and a photograph of a girl about 7 holding an ear of yellow popcorn. By the 29th of August, they had $48,150. Then it stopped. It stopped the way these things do, without any drama. Just fewer envelopes and then almost none. And by the second week of September, they were sitting $13,750 short, with the contractor holding an October start date and a materials price good for 11 more days. Junie wanted to do a fundraiser at the Legion. Tova wanted to try one more mailing. Renata was quietly pricing what a home equity line would do to her mother, and Marlies knew she was and said nothing about it. On a Thursday morning, Marlies went out to the barn and pulled the blue tarp off the oven. It was a two-deck bakery oven, stainless, with a steam injector and a stone hearth in both decks, and she had bought it at an equipment auction in Rochester in 2003 for $1,100 and had gotten a neighbor with a skid loader to set it in there, and it had never once been plugged in. She stood and looked at it for a while. Then she went in the house and made 2 phone calls, and on Saturday a man drove up from Winona with a flatbed and a pallet jack and gave her $14,000 for it, cash, and said she could have gotten more if she had waited for the spring auctions, and she said she knew that. She did not tell anybody. Renata found out in November from the neighbor. "Mom, don't. You had that thing 30-some winters." "I had a rusting oven in a barn 30-some winters," Marlis said. "That's not the same as having a bakery. I want you to hear the difference because it took me a long time to hear it." Renata did not say anything. "Your father decided for me in 1994, and I have been mad about it ever since, and I am still mad about it, and I expect to be mad about it for the rest of my life." Marlis was drying a pan, and she kept drying it. "That's the whole difference, and it's the only thing I wanted out of any of this." The abatement crew came the first week of October and pulled 411 pounds of ammonia out of that system and hauled the pipe out in a dumpster. The chiller went on a concrete pad on the north side the third week. It was about the size of a car and it ran quiet. They cut the old wall open where the pipe had run and took out 11 wheelbarrows of 100-year-old sawdust, and Junie's grandson kept a jar of it. And the inspector came out on the 4th of November and walked the room and looked at the sealed system and the sprinkler head and the new roof patch. He wrote for a long time. Then he complained about the sawdust and the rest of the walls for 11 minutes, and then he signed it. The final number, with the wall and the roof and everything, came to $61,840. Marlis noticed. She sat in the truck in the lot afterward with the paperwork on the passenger seat and figured it 3 times. And what Cass Kubiak had paid out of a janitor's check over the back half of his life to keep that room cold, and what it cost to fix it so it would stay cold without him, were within $240 of each other. She never told anybody that either, and she did not think it meant anything. But she thought about it a good deal that winter. The trailer came back down from the elevator on the 11th of November, and they loaded the room back in on a Tuesday with 9 people, and it took 4 hours. By the second week of that following May, there were beans on a fence. Marley saw them driving out to the building. Roman Dietz's place was on the county road with a woven wire fence along the yard, and somebody had run twine up it, 8 or 9 strings, and there were vines climbing them about knee-high with the leaves still small. She slowed down. She did not stop. In July, she drove past again, and the whole fence was covered. And they were red, exactly the way Ilse Dietz had told a 25-year-old locker plant operator they would be in October of 1986. Tova Sandell put her grandmother's pole beans in on 4 rows the first week of June and got 140 pounds off them in September, and brought back 2 pounds in a paper sack, and Marlis weighed it on the postal scale and wrote it in the book. The building is open Tuesdays and Saturdays now. There are 81 lockers sponsored out of 96. Locker 1 has a brass tag on the door with the name Ilse Dietz on it. In the corner of the main floor, there is a chest freezer for people who just want to leave something and go, and there is a sign over it that says, "Write on it first, please," in Renata's handwriting. A woman drove up from Iowa in August with a Folgers can of her father's oats and sat in the front office and cried for 20 minutes. And Marlies made her a cup of coffee and did not say very much, and then got out a card and a pencil and wrote her father's name on it. And the woman spelled it twice. Locker 8 is lockers 8 through 22 now. They ran out of room in the first year. Saturday mornings, Junie Marek sets up a card table in the front office, under the north window, and runs the church urn. And people come and sit. Marlis bakes on a 30-inch range in her own kitchen and hauls it out in sheet pans on the back seat of the truck, kolaches mostly, and rye and whatever is going soft that week. It is not a bakery. There is no deck oven, and there never will be. And the light through that window is exactly as good as she remembered it in 1992. Tova asked her about it one Saturday in the fall, sitting on the desk with her boots hanging. "Do you ever think about doing it for real?" The bakery people would come. "No. Why not?" Marlies thought about how to say it. "Because I finally figured out what he was doing in here," she said. "He wasn't keeping seed, honey. He was keeping people's word for them until they got back on their feet and could keep it themselves. That's all this ever was. Somebody says I'll be back, and everybody knows they probably won't be. And one person in the whole county says, fine, I'll hold it anyway. That's a lot to ask of a guy. He didn't ask anybody. That was the trouble with him." Marlis picked up her cup. "I've got a room full of other people's promises out there, and I'm the only one left who knows where they are. I'm 62. I'm not going to spend what I've got left making bread." The padlock she cut off that door sits on the office desk. She uses it to hold down the receipt book when the door is open and the wind comes through. The ledger is on the desk too, the green one, and it stays open now because people like to look at their own name in it. That last Saturday in October, after everybody had gone and Junie had taken the urn back, Marla stayed to close up. The Iowa woman's oats were bagged and weighed and sitting on the counter, 11 ounces, and the card was written out except for the last line. She turned the ledger around and got the pencil out of the spine. It was down to about 1.5 inches now, and she had sharpened it with a paring knife, and it did not have many more sharpenings in it. And when it was gone, she was going to have to use something else, and she had already decided she would. She wrote the date and the name the woman had spelled twice, and 11 ounces. Then in the last column, she wrote the word her husband had written 1,940 times before her, in a building he gave away his whole life to keep cold, for people who mostly never came back, and who mostly never knew. Hold. She closed the book, turned off the light, and went out past the shelves and pulled the freight door down. And behind the wall the new machine came on quiet and went to work in the dark.